my nerd world.
It is my nerd world, and welcome to it. I'm your host, John Justice, for this bonus podcast, How to Save the Modern Blockbuster Movie. I've been thinking about this for a long, long time. Being a lifelong Star Wars fan, having lived through the original trilogy era, the prequel trilogy era, the sequel trilogy era, from the inception of the MCU, the DC movies that have come out, these franchises that have dominated the box office over the course of the past few decades, we've gotten into this cycle of promotion and discussion around the more popular franchises that I think are ruining a lot of these intellectual properties, these franchises, these IPs. And I think there's a way to save the modern blockbuster, and something that I haven't heard anybody else talk about. Now, I could be completely out of my mind, but I don't think that I am. It comes down to one word and one word only, and that is scarcity. The one franchise I think you can point to, in a certain extent, is the Avatar films. Now, granted, the Avatar movies are good films. They're not pinkies up, right? Cinema. They're not going to end up winning, for the most part, your best picture, right? Although there's an argument to be made that they should. But I think part of their popularity, beyond the spectacle and the timeless storytelling of James Cameron, is the fact that he's created a franchise now that is going to thrive because of the scarcity that's around it. It's something that we really haven't seen since the original trilogy. And I'm certainly not the first, and I won't be the last, to make the point that if the original Star Wars trilogy were released today, I question whether or not the movies would be able to survive under the weight and scrutiny of the social sphere now, and how we go and approach our modern action, superhero, science fiction blockbusters. We get into this vicious cycle now where, unfortunately, groupthink takes hold before people even have a chance to go see the movie. These aren't necessarily events anymore. They're not films where we talk as much amongst our friends as we do online and message boards or on Twitter or via podcast. And I think there's a formula out there that if there was a studio brave enough to do it, that they could actually bring back the value of scarcity, while at the same time bringing an experience that many people will never have the opportunity to experience in their lifetime, of what it's like to go to a film as an event knowing that you're not going to be able to watch it right away on streaming. Maybe you'll only be able to get a physical copy of it. Maybe your only other way to experience the film for younger people will be through toys and collecting. I think it's part of one of the biggest reasons why, apart from just how special Star Wars was, one of the biggest reasons why it ended up being such a success was everything that we've heard about it, but also the idea of scarcity. You had to physically go out to the theater to see it over and over again. Star Wars was in the theater for months and months on end. Ahead of the release of The Empire Strikes Back a few years later, it was re-released again. We weren't able to watch it at home for years upon years to come, and it made it something unique and special. So I'm going to preface this by saying the product needs to be good. The story needs to be good. The special effects, if we're talking about an action film, the special effects need to be good. But let's just say all those elements are there, and it's a brand new intellectual property, maybe a burgeoning franchise. If it's going to be able to succeed, I think you're going to need to adopt some of what I want to lay out in the podcast. So this is how I'm going to approach it. I've written 8 books in my EMBARK science fiction series. When I decided to write EMBARK, I was inspired by George Lucas and the storytelling of George Lucas. I never, ever thought I would be a writer. It wasn't anything that I was interested in doing. I'm not a big reader. I read books, but I'm not an avid reader by any stretch. But seeing the creation of the prequels and the original trilogy, and then subsequently beyond George Lucas, the sequel trilogy, I really wanted to experience for myself what it was like to go and craft my own universe. Didn't want to make something that was too closely aligned with Star Wars, because you set a science fiction film apart from Earth in a distant part of the galaxy, and you can't help but avoid comparisons to Star Wars. So I decided to create my space opera series based on a future Earth in 2172. I crafted the original EMBARK story to be a mashup of the genres that I love. So your space opera, your disaster films, a little bit of your John Hughes and James Cameron-esque romance that I've enjoyed, from the 80s through the 90s and into the 2000s. Ultimately, when I wrote the original EMBARK book and the subsequent 6 other books in the series, I always envisioned that this is the movie that I would want to see. These are the sequels that I would want to see if I were going into the movie theater and not watching a Star Wars film, since that is my favorite franchise. And that was the approach that I took for my original EMBARK story. So how I want to lay this out is under the idea, right? Because I have dreams. I have a dream that one day EMBARK would be purchased to be turned into a film. I think for any science fiction author, there's probably a bit of that dream in them, that to one day see what they've created up on the big screen. And when I wrote the book, I wrote it specifically for that reason. I'm going to write what I would want to be sitting in the theater and watching on screen, which is why a lot of people have said that my book kind of reads like a movie, for good or bad. So hypothetically speaking, I'm going to lay out a way to promote the book, sell the book, market the book, and present the book as a movie in a way that I think other modern blockbusters could take heed and avoid the pitfalls that we've seen so often. I ultimately decided to finally sit down and do the podcast after watching The Flash last weekend. At the moment when I go and watch a DCEU movie or a Marvel movie, or really any action film, I approach it from is this movie rewatchable for me? As I'm watching the movie, as I finish watching the movie, is this something that I want to own on Blu-ray? Is it something that I'll wait till it comes out on streaming and I'll watch it again on streaming? How rewatchable is it? You look at Thor: Love and Thunder, for example. When after I saw that movie, I really didn't have a desire to go and to purchase it. Happens to be the case for a lot of the recent phase of the Marvel movies. Sort of the Spider-Man movies aside. And even going and rewatching Thor: Love and Thunder on TV, I thought it was just okay. Watching The Flash, though, I'm watching this film going, man, I'm really enjoying this. Were some of the CGI effects wonky? Yeah, there was a bizarre sort of stylistic choice in the way that they decided to craft the CGI, but it certainly had a consistent aesthetic to it. But ultimately, I was wholly entertained by the movie. I loved the reappearance of Michael Keaton as Batman. I thought that Supergirl was fantastic. I'd take a Supergirl movie any day of the week. But the movie bombed at the box office. Now, I don't know if my formula here that I'm going to lay out would help a movie like The Flash, but it certainly couldn't hurt. Because there was already commentary about The Flash before it even landed in theaters. Whether it was the controversy around Ezra Miller and the accusations against him, which I don't think a lot of people are even aware of. I am aware of it because of the podcast that I listen to and just how much I enjoy learning and knowing the latest about popular culture, especially the movie-going experience. I listen to a lot of movie podcasts. It's a really wonky way of me to go out of my way to say that. But once the movie hit the big screen, people are recording snippets of it. You can go on to TikTok or Twitter, and you can see people commenting on the CGI, with actual footage from the film, and suddenly now the experience is getting ruined. Groupthink sets in. People's opinions are forming before they have a chance to see it, and suddenly now I don't think a lot of people's opinions are even their own anymore. And I've thought about this a lot with so much of the commentary, especially around Star Wars. And what gets said about Star Wars movies. The moment that you hear a piece of news about a particular movie that's going to be made, comments about it. People are already saying it's going to fail just based off of nothing other than who's directing it, the actors that are in it, and the potential time frame in which it's going to appear. This is one of the things I'll talk about on the Star Wars podcast this week. But there's actual controversy right now because the photographs that have been released from the Ahsoka show coming out in August show Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka with her arms crossed in several of the photos. And there's actual people arguing and criticizing it, saying she's got her arms crossed too much. I mean, it's gotten that ridiculous. So, here is my idea on how to save the modern blockbuster. And I'm going to put this under the idea that my first book, EMBARK Book 1, is going to be made into a movie. Let's start off with the initial announcement of the film. All of this is being taken from when I was a kid, prior to the internet, and how we found out about movies. Because I think really that's the formula that we need to try to deploy today. You announce that a movie is going to be made. You announce who the director is and maybe who the actors are. And then that's it. This is when we're scheduling it to come out. Don't give release dates on when the trailers are supposed to be out. Make sure that every single person that's a part of that production has signed a cease and desist letter. Or, I'm sorry, not a cease and desist, an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. I wrote down my notes wrong. A non-disclosure agreement. Do whatever you can to the best of your ability to lock down every single aspect of the filming and production of the film. All of it. Do as good a job as you possibly can of shielding the public from any of the live-action filming that may be happening on location somewhere, to the best of your ability. We live in a world now where everybody is walking around with a high-definition camera in their pocket, so that's getting more and more difficult to go and do. But there are links that could be made, and I'm sure new tactics that could be deployed to try to keep the production as locked down as possible. As you move closer to the release of the film, you obviously craft the trailers specific to the movie you're trying to sell, in which case you want to make sure the audience knows, as it relates to EMBARK, that this is a science fiction action film. It's got a bit of romance in it. It's going to harken back to sort of the quality of what we saw in the 90s and 80s in terms of action movies, right? You give a feel and a tone for the movie with a general overview that this is a disaster film about how humanity has to escape Earth to eventually go out and populate distant worlds set in a future where everybody has the ability to fly, where flight culture, space, and air flight culture has replaced car culture. You craft the trailers appropriately and you release them, in the proper amount leading up to the film without giving too much away. When it comes to other pre-promotion, you do your posters to give a feel and a vibe for what the film is, but you make sure that leading up to it, there's no controversy around who the director is. Nothing is getting out in terms of any sort of conflict that's taking place with regard to the production. Even if there is, sometimes those things are unavoidable, but you do everything you can to make sure there's nothing about this movie that people can go and peg preconceived ideas to it and form opinions before they actually go and see it on the big screen. Do some pre-promotion, maybe an interview, with select outlets which you believe you can trust some of the actors, right? Just enough to get people excited, but nothing extensive, nothing about the production, how much CGI work was done. Maybe do a limited run of special previews prior to the movie being released, or maybe none at all. I think there's actually an argument to be made, and I would even go a step further, where if you know you've got a good enough product, you release a trailer, but you make it the most teaser of teaser trailers, and that's it. Just enough to get butts in the seats, if you know you've got a quality product. Make it something special and unique where you need to be there opening night to see this thing that you know very little about. Don't plan on any streaming. Let people know that there's going to be no streaming planned for the immediate future. If you want to do some pre-release screenings, perhaps limit those reviews to just those specific outlets' websites and not social media commentary. Right now, we're in this place where And I see it all the time, and I watch them. But individuals have already gone and seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. They're already doing their out-of-the-theater reaction to it. And views and opinions of that film have been formed for months now because of when it debuted at the Cannes Film Festival over a month ago. Stop all of that. In the spirit of George Lucas, let me take it a step further. I don't know if the technology exists, but there's got to be a way to put a filter on modern films to make them incapable of being video recorded. Why nobody else has come up with this, I do not know. In my mind, I was thinking, well, if you just release it in 3D, but I don't think that's a good idea. But if you just released it in 3D, nobody would ever be able to get a really quality recording of it unless you figured out a way to get the 3D filter onto the glasses on the camera. But why nobody has developed a filter that can go into modern films to make them incapable of being video recorded, where it's just blurry if it's recorded on a cell phone or on a video camera, I don't know. But I say we go and we embrace the spirit of George Lucas and come up with a new technology as such. Because that's a part of this experience that gets ruined, is that people go into the theaters, they're now recording clips of it on their phone, and they're posting it up on TikTok, talking about how crappy things are. And that's another part of the problem, is that people tend to go and just focus on the negative of the movies and not the positives of it. So everything that you see online of, for example, The Flash is, oh, the CGI babies at the beginning of the film look awful. All the CGI at the end looks bad. Well, you know what? The movie was wholly entertaining, and I'll watch it over and over again despite all that. But for a lot of people, they'll never bother with it. Or the movie will be ruined for them because groupthink in the social sphere will have grabbed hold. We have to be able to and try to remove that social sphere aspect that ruins the experience of modern filmmaking. You put it in the theater, depending on how popular it is, you leave it in the theater for a while. You make it known that this is not going to be on, and you don't sell it for any streaming platforms. And then I also think you take a George Lucas route to it if the movie's popular. And again, there's a lot of ifs in this. I'm just going to assume that EMBARK is going to be an incredibly popular movie that people will love and children and adults will both enjoy. And they'll want to be able to continue to experience it, but won't have the movie unless they go to the theater to see it to do that. In which case, the marketing for the film, as it relates to toys or items for collectors, would actually become something of value again, focusing on the scarcity of wanting to enjoy the experience and taking it home, but not being able to. Go so far as to not even put it on a streaming platform. Say this is going to be a physical release only, and delay that physical release from the theatrical to make that in and of itself an event. Change it up. Switch it up. I was inspired, too, watching Air recently, the movie about how Nike ended up landing Michael Jordan to wear their shoes. And I think there's a level of fear in Hollywood to do this because we've just become so accustomed to the way we release films and getting people talking about it. But I think there's a lot of movies out there that are actually better than what a lot of people say, that don't end up getting the time of day, or opinions are made by other individuals and those on social media. Take away the ability of the clowns that are making money off the constant negativity on YouTube to do just that and turn it on its head. This is what I would do if I were ever able to go sell EMBARK. A couple of other ideas that I had with this as well were and this is sort of different than the scarcity angle of it, but just things that I am surprised that no studios have done yet. For my EMBARK film, like I have in the book, there would be a lot of needle drops, songs within the movie. A part of my inspiration for EMBARK was also Ready Player One. I wanted the same type of camaraderie and a bit of the pop culture references like Ready Player One had. Obviously, the story is much different. Ready Player One was designed to be filled with pop culture. The whole book and film were centered around that. But I created a dynamic in the movie where the music of my generation, 80s through the 2000s, was popular among the characters in the book, so that it had some connectivity to those that are reading it that are of my age or younger. A book's written for adults, but it's fine for ages 11 and up. And I imagine that in my film, if it were ever made into a film, that I would have quite a few needle drops. songs in the movie that fit with what I wrote in the book. But I also thought about the fact of, wouldn't it be unique if you were able to put different versions of the story on the physical release of the movie, of the physical release, that actually had different needle drop soundtracks? You have films that have different soundtracks, especially when it comes to the dialogue. You have films that have the director's commentary or actor's commentary. I imagine there'd be a way to actually change the specific songs when they arrive to have them match particular genres. So for my version of EMBARK, it would have alternative music, music from the 90s through the 2000s, and a bit of what the characters in the book talk about. However, there's nothing to say that you couldn't change up the genre and have, well, here's a 70s version of the needle drop songs in the movie. Here's an 80s version. Here's a yacht rock version. And you could choose which one that you wanted from the commentary or from the menu on the Blu-ray release. I love films and I love the movie-going experience. And for as much as I watch the commentary on YouTube and other YouTube channels and do my own when it comes to my Star Wars podcasts, I just feel that we're doing such a disservice to the experience because everything just becomes so diluted. I was also partly inspired by my favorite band and the other podcast that I do, Depeche Mode, because when I was growing up, they put an album out like every year, every 2 years. And when you're younger, that seems like a lifetime when you go between 2 years. But now, as you get older, that time flies by. And the band really had taken to releasing albums every 4 years. And in this case, because of what happened with the pandemic, we didn't get another album for about 6 years. And this experience around this latest release has been absolutely special. And I think a part of the reason why it's been so special is because fans have been clamoring for new material, haven't gotten it in a long time, and therefore there is just this feeling of excitement that you don't get when you're constantly fed a stream of content from this thing that you love. Now, it helps that the album's really good. You still have to have a good product. But it goes without saying that many people, and I would actually argue this point now too, believe that Star Wars has suffered quite a bit just because it's become so diluted. And we haven't had any theatrical releases, and I firmly believe the fandom puts a level of importance on theatrical releases over the streaming content. But, we're not a few months without some sort of Star Wars content. And on top of that, the Star Wars content has lacked in a lot of ways. Whereas you look at a franchise like Avatar, and the big question mark that everybody had about The Way of Water was, is this movie going to be successful? Even I was wondering. Avatar really didn't have like that cultural impact the way that so many other IPs do. The best example that I would give of that is that when you go to conventions, you don't see you don't see people that are dressed as giant blue Na'vi. It's just not a part of the culture. You don't see people wearing Avatar shirts, for crying out loud. So even I wondered whether or not The Way of Water was going to be successful. It was. It was a good film. Right? You're not talking about your Oscar-winning, type of acting performances or anything like that, but James Cameron knows how to craft an exciting story at about 3 hours long. People knew what the spectacle was like, enjoyed that experience so much in the first Avatar, they came back for this Avatar, and they accepted and went on this journey. But a part of that, I think, is it's a unique experience. We hadn't gotten it for years. And so we knew that, that first Avatar, that was something special. I'll go see this next one. And this next one ended up being something special. Why? Because you're not experiencing that all the time. I doubt this is ever going to happen. And I'm almost hesitant to go and put this podcast up because if some company is brave enough to do it, I'm going to say, hey, I said it first. Who knows? Maybe somebody will hear it and give me credit. Or they'll want to go and actually option my EMBARK science fiction space opera series 4 movies. You never know. But it was something that I was sitting on for a long time. I thought about putting up a blog post at mynerdworld.net, the website, and I thought, you know what? Why don't I just go ahead and do a 20-minute podcast and lay out my idea on how to revive and save the modern blockbuster. I've been listening a lot to the Rewatchables podcast from the Ringer Network, Absolutely love listening to Rewatchables. It's fantastic. But when they go back, and Bill Simmons and the other hosts, Sean Fennessy and Chris Ryan, when they go back and cover these movies pre-internet, I'm just reminded of how special these films were and the spectacle of it. And I thought for a moment that Kathleen Kennedy was going to go that route from Lucasfilm, saying that she wanted to eventize the films, but then we got this new release schedule of a film in 2026 or 2 films in 2026 and then 1 in 2027, and I'm kind of going, okay, I'm down for it. I want my Star Wars, but at the same time, I don't know if that's the recipe for success or not. I think scarcity is the key. And Lucasfilm has an opportunity to do that because there's been so much distance since the rise of Skywalker. If they pulled back on what they were doing in terms of the live action, which is tough because I love my Star Wars and I want to watch Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka and the Acolyte as much as the next person. But that's only because I know that they're coming. If I didn't know they were coming and I had to wait another 3 years and we were all having to sit back and wait for the next Star Wars product and a movie some 6 years after the rise of Skywalker, you want to talk about it being an event? That's an event. In something that could potentially rival an Avatar, because arguably one would argue that Star Wars is more popular than Avatar. Or I could be completely off my rocker, and this is the dumbest idea ever. Either way, I got it out into the ether, and I'm happy to share it, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear from you and maybe do a follow-up podcast to get some of your thoughts on this idea. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Or you can leave a comment up on YouTube as well. And since I was talking about my EMBARK science fiction space opera series, I hope that if you enjoy reading science fiction, you'll check out my series. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. Again, it's written for adults, but it's great for 11 years old and older. You're not going to be, if you're a parent, your kids will not be caught by anything off guard in these books. They are very family friendly, good versus evil, tyranny versus liberty, right versus wrong. You know the drill. The first book's story is as follows. Katha's father died 1 year ago. Yesterday, he gave her the key to saving humanity. She just doesn't know it yet. Taft Guardia picked the right day to upgrade his ship after fellow pilot Katha Morrow received a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father. What he thought was a routine investigation quickly turns into a dangerous journey of discovery and survival when an industrial accident sets off an apocalyptic chain of events. As a corporate madman with an armada at his disposal attempts to gain control of the global evacuation, Taft and Katha discover what may be the only hope of stopping him. The clock is ticking as Taft and Katha, along with a ragtag squadron of pilots, fight to save Earth's evacuees from annihilation and secure their future among the stars. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with some romance and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. Go to Amazon.com, search for John, Jon Justice, and EMBARK, or mynerdworld.net. Also available on Kindle Unlimited as well. And as always, if you want to support My Nerd World, that's the way to do it. Go pick yourself up a copy of the paperback, the hardcover, the audiobook narrated and produced by me, or the ebook. The ebook for book 1 is $2.99, but you can actually get a special on the first 3 books in the trilogy for just 99 cents in ebook if you go online to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, John, Jon Justice. Be sure to check out my Depeche Mode, the podcast, on whatever podcast platform you listen to. Also, the upcoming Star Wars podcast, My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. Another episode will be coming out tomorrow for that. So, again, if you're on the podcast network here for My Nerd World, be sure to look for it depending on what your settings are so one doesn't cancel out the other. Call me crazy if you want, but I like to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or on YouTube. Thanks for listening. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you are safe. And I'll talk to you again real soon. Bye.